Like that?
Yep.
Okay, and this goes in my pocket? Got it.
And then whenever you can get started.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, cool. Do you want to bring the books up or?
Yeah, sure. I'll bring one up at least.
Okay.
I'll just bring one. It's fine. I'm just going to leave my beer here. Thanks so much. Okay. Thanks.
Overalls appropriate for this too, or coveralls.
I'm a lazy dresser, so yeah.
I know sometimes I have a whole wardrobe of those. Very happy.
That's kind of the idea. Yeah. Yeah, I have a bunch now.
All right, I'm gonna go.
Okay. Okay.
Easy crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got
You gotta go.
Hi everyone. Our moms are here. Hello and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-I Supply Curiosity Club. We're your hosts this evening. I am Tobias and this is Will. Together we have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you.
As attendees of the Hand-I Supply Curiosity Club, you are all now members, provided you adhere to our philosophy.
Ex Curiositas Scientia.
We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual novice. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice.
This is our flag and our mascot Franklin. The lightning bolt represents the receipt of knowledge, the enlightenment of illumination, the resonance of truths understood. It awakens and excites us and makes us hungry for more. And Curiosity Club is made merry by our fellow artisans at Fort George Brewery and Historical Store. All right, let's give a warm Curiosity Club welcome to Nahanni Arson.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for coming out. This is my first time doing this, just to get that out of the way. I recently made a book based on my father's slide photography that he took from 1974 to 1987 while he was a tree planter up in...
Sorry, that's totally my fault.
No, it's no problem.
Should be on. Are we getting nothing? All right, cool. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Sorry, everyone.
So yeah, my dad was a tree planter for about 11 years, from 74 to 87, and while he was out in the woods, he was taking photographs the entire time and shooting Kodachrome and slides. And he didn't really think much of that, I suppose, but when a few years ago, when my daughter was really young, I was looking for photographs of myself when I was a baby, and which I could find none of. And he said, well, I have all these tree planting photos, you're in a whole bunch of those, so why don't you look through those? And as I was growing up, I remember, these stories, because sometimes when I was sitting in a park when I was a teenager with my friends just hanging out, there'd be some odd stranger that would come and walk up to me and say, I knew you when you were born. I was there when you were born in the camp. And so there was sort of this story that I knew about as, from kind of an outside perspective of the fact that I was born in a tree planting camp, that my parents were tree planters, and that I was born in a teepee on a sandbar up 11 miles up a river off of the west coast of British Columbia. But I didn't really put all that, I mean, you hear things as you're growing up and you don't necessarily think of them as reality. And then when I got this large bag of slides that my dad dropped off to me, I started going through it and realized that he had documented everything. And he had documented all the camps that he had worked in, and all of the people. And as I was asking him about them as well, he actually has a very photographic memory of people's names and the places they went to. And so I've spent the last 2 years exploring his collection and exploring, my history, essentially, that I heard lots about but had never seen visually. And so now I can share this with you. Yeah, I'm just going to go through the slides and I can talk about them that way. This is my dad. He's 19 in this photo. My dad was, sorry, I'm going to be a little jerky at this for a second, but I'll get used to it. My dad was 19 in this photo. When he was in high school, his parents decided, they had 8 kids. He was the second set of twins. So he was the 8th child, literally. He came right after his twin sister. And before that was a set of twins, and before that was 4 siblings. So his parents were ready to retire. And so they pieced out to Vancouver Island and left my dad living in the backyard of the house that they gave to his sister and her husband. And so he lived in a tent in the backyard and until he finished high school. And he met my mom. He met my mom in high school, and they decided they'd been reading a lot about back to the land movement and not wanting to hang out with the football players, and so they decided to buy this truck and camperize it and go for a couple of road trips until my dad started. This is my mother. This is Murch Lake. Murch Lake, 1974. They were living on a farm up there. They started farming with this guy who actually gave them a dog that he thought was going to grow into a full-size Doberman Pinscher, but actually it turned out to be just this big and never grew, but turned out to be a really great bear dog. It would scare the bears away. His name was Turkey. I think there might be a photo in here that I've included. But anyway, so yeah, this is my mother. She's about 18 there. This is my dad. This is one of the many places that they were living in. My dad's actually was an aspiring singer-songwriter throughout the entire, still is, pretty much. He actually is a really terrific writer, and he would write during this whole. put this book together. I don't know if you guys know, but I put a book together of all these slides. And right at the very end of it, he told me that he had also a box of journals that he'd written for the last 10 years. So he wrote journals front to back, and a lot of songs that he'd written were included there, and poetry and a bunch of different stuff. But yeah, he's had a guitar on him since he was 17. This is my mom. This is my mom up in Port Eliza. This is the first contract they were planting on. This is, she's actually pregnant with me in this photo, but you can't really tell. I come just a little bit later. And this is my dad's first contract up in Bloom Creek. He went with my Uncle Leif, and this was his 52 Pontiac that he lived in the back of while he was planting. He forgot a tent. He forgot to bring a tent completely, so he built his own tent out of some branches and some clear plastic that they had in camp, and he lived in that for a few weeks. This is Port Eliza. This is a couple girls that were planting on that contract, and this is where a lot of his first photos are taken. Port Eliza is on the coast. When there's different, the coast planting is by far the hardest planting because it's on hills that is really, really steep. So they get paid more. They get paid about 25 cents a tree as opposed to 10 cents a tree when it's flat. But the work is really, really hard. This is on the way to Port Eliza. Sorry for these arrows. Maybe if I do. That's better. This is Kingcome Inlet. Kingcome Inlet, if you go to the northern tip of Vancouver Island and directly over by a boat or a float plane, then you end up in Kingcome Inlet. These are a couple of the tents there. Going out to the sites from wherever they were camped, then people would only be able to bring a truck or two with them that would get barged in. So they would load people up onto the trucks to get them out to the hillside. Most of the trucks were real crummy. They were actually called crummies. And they caused a lot of problems for the most part, but also very handy. This is John Betts. He's somebody I've known for many, many years, and he played the tin whistle. And this is all Kingcome Inlet. This is the camp that I was born in.
So are they planting for crown land or private owners, or who is contracting these?
Tree planting came about because when they were clear cutting, they started clear cutting in the 40s and 50s, and the regeneration naturally wasn't happening fast enough. Then it started that the loggers' wives actually were designated to start planting the trees, but it was ineffective. So then they had to, in order to offset the stumpage fees, the forestry companies had to start contracting out to private groups of people. And a lot of the people that took the contract were people like my parents who were young and trying to figure things out and were very nomadic. And it paid really well. It actually paid about 10 cents a tree. So in a matter of months, and then people could plant an average of 1,500 to 3,000 trees a day. So they were making somewhere between $200 or $300 a day, which translated to now is quite a lot. And then they would plant from late February to late June, and then they would have the rest of the year off, essentially. So it was quite an attractive lifestyle to people who wanted to be able to travel or do something else with the rest of their year. But yes, they were hired by the forestry contractors, by the forestry industry, foresters. This is also in Kingcome Inlet. This is the truck loaded up. This is my mom here and my dad. There's snow still on the ground because they would start planting when they would basically follow the snow melt. So they would start on the west coast in the early spring, and then as the snow melted, then they would go further up into BC. This is what you do on your downtime. This is the kitchen. This is Pauline Brinkman, now Pauline Kendall. And this is the kitchen. Everything that they would bring into the camps, they brought and built in the camps. So all cooking supplies, all kitchen, all housing, all utensils, all food, all had to be pre-bought and accounted for the fact that they're going to be out for at least 2 or 3 months. This is my mother and me. When my mom was leaving, pregnant, to go into camp, my grandmother, who's quite an eccentric, packed her a suitcase full of slips and nighties and things to read after she had her baby. She knew that she was going out to camp to have her baby, and she decided that she still needed a hospital bag. So she packed her a hospital suitcase, which got passed around with the people who were in the camp. This is Doug Cowell. This is my father, Doug Cowell, in an act of safety. This is Doug Cowell. He took a lot of photos as well, particularly during this camp. This is something, they had a contest to build a floating vessel with only a jackknife. That was the challenge. So he built this kayak. And there's another look at it. And this is him trying it out. This is the ceremony of the kayak, wrapped in a tarp. This is my mother's nightgown. And there he is trying it out. Actually, I think this is Simon trying it out first. And it floats. And this is Doug floating off very high down the river. This is my mother. This is the day before I was born. This is the teepee I was born in. And this photo, my mom hadn't even seen until 3 months ago or 4 months ago when I went back up to Vancouver to look at a whole bunch of slides that my dad then found more of when he found out we were going to do the book. And he said, "You should come see these slides." And I was like, wow, that's a slide I haven't seen before. And neither had my mom. And neither had anyone else. So that's that. That's where I was born. And that's me and my mom. This is my Aunt Holly. This is me. My aunt actually had a baby in the same teepee about 6 months later. That's a couple days later. My mom was cooking in that camp and then resumed tree planting about 3 or 4 days later. And I slept in the tree boxes, which there's some interesting stories about how maybe illegal that might be. Bears and, wolves and newborn babies and whatnot, but it all worked out. This is a photo of, this is my parents and me. This is Simon Kendall's mom, Nancy. She was in a wheelchair. She was paraplegic in a car accident, and she took a float plane up to come and visit the camp. This is Nancy, Simon, her son, taking the boat over to the native community that was just downriver from where I was born. When I was 20, I actually got a chance to go back up and visit this community and visit Charlie Moon, who came up and visited and met all the planters when I was born, and attend a potlatch, which was really amazing. They're really good at soccer. They played a lot of soccer, and so they would have, every week they would have a match with the tree planters, the natives there, and the planters. And this is John Betts. There's some of the kids. This is while they're filming. There's a documentary out called Do It With Joy. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but if you look it up on Vimeo, they have a short version of it. There's a longer version that's about an hour and a half long. The half-hour version is on Vimeo, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's a film that they made about tree planting at that time. And it's one of the other very few documents of this period of time in the silviculture industry. This is my mom in a bathtub with me. There's about 200 or 300 slides that got damaged about a year and a half ago, unfortunately, not that long ago, that my dad had, and had a brief grieving, well, still is kind of grieving about. To me, it's amazing that he has such a large collection that is still intact, but for him, he can remember all of these ones that got destroyed, so there's quite a few of those. This is them going, this is when my dad started contracting on his first contract up to Mackenzie, and these are his trucks. This is in the camp, this is the cook shack, and then the big tent where everyone would hang out. And they would construct these, they would bring in some materials to make, and then a lot of wood they would just find within the forest in order to make their shelter. This is an abandoned logging camp, and a lot of times they would move into the old camps and repurpose them. Since that's where all the trees were cut down anyway, then that's where they would start planting. So they would a lot of them were quite destroyed, but it was just shelter to use and that they didn't have to build. This is me and my mom and Holly, her sister, and her baby, Eridanus, in the logging camp. This is my dad and Bart, and another destroyed slide. And Bart is the person who gave my dad a contract to take over because he couldn't do it, and it's how my dad started contracting. This is my aunt and us in the city. All my family is from Vancouver, North Vancouver. My mom and my dad and pretty much everybody in my whole family still lives in Vancouver, BC. And that's where That's where they would live in the off season, and still do. This is a barge up. They're going up to Butte Inlet. They would hire a barge that would take the trucks and all of their gear up and then just dump them off. And then they would stay there until the barge came to pick them up. So, and there was no communication, essentially. There was nothing. Yeah?
I was wondering what kind of food they ate if they stayed without resupply for so long.
It was primarily vegetarian. They couldn't keep meat, so they brought a lot of fruits and vegetables. And when they would get to camp, then they would build a root cellar. So they would dig out the earth and to keep all the fruits and vegetables cold. But primarily it was just grains and vegetable. They had to make their own bread. They had to make, honey, peanut butter, stuff that didn't go bad, essentially. Yeah. Not really. There wasn't really that much time. I mean, if there was the places that they were going to, it was pretty much early spring, so there wasn't much growing at the time anyway. And there's only one case, which I debated about putting the slide in. But they did, there's a couple of instances where my dad hit a deer once, so they used the deer for food. And there's another time that there was a bear that wouldn't go away. Most of the time the bears would come into camp and then they would, scurry off because the dogs were there. And most of the time they were just black bears. But there is one time that a bear came and he was a threat to everybody. So they ended up disposing of the bear. And so they ate the bear. And that's about it. Most of the time there was it was just vegetarian. They actually my dad hired a couple cooks that worked in a really good vegetarian restaurant. And the food, people would actually come for the food. Like the food was really good. We'd get them up in the morning. Getting into most of the locations where they would plant, they would either have to fly in by plane or take a boat. There was a lot of, unless it was up in the interior, then there was no road access. So this is on a boat. And these are some regular planters. This is Signe. She was a cook, and she actually painted the design, which you'll see in some of the other slides, on the side of my dad's truck. She's an artist. She still is. She lives in Ucluelet. This is another sailboat heading up to camp. This is Bart, who is my uncle. This is a poorly dismounted barge. This is the view from my dad's teepee when he would wake up in the morning. This is early morning, breakfast. This is another, this is Rose Lake. It's up in the interior, close to Mackenzie, BC, and one of my dad's first contracts. This is Tony. He's a doctor. And I've just learned he's also now a master gardener and still keeping cool. Out on the hill, this is a lot of my family and a lot of the regular planters that my dad hired. He hired most of his planters out of high school, a lot of his friends that lived in his neighborhood, and then just mostly my mother's family. Actually, he bonded really tight with my mom's family, and he ended up hiring them a lot. This is me and my cousin Ari, and a parrot that nobody can explain. Volleyball, for whatever reason, ended up being the sport of choice by tree planters, and they brought a net to every camp, and yeah, it's one of my earliest memories is volleyball. Evening entertainment, this is a little dark, but letter writing, magazine reading, and playing music is basically all there was to do. A lot of reading, actually. They would bring up novels, and then they would rip them in half so that somebody could read the first half, and when they were done, they would give it to another person to start reading, and then they would read the second half. Outside the tent. This is the barge going into Butte Inlet. There's a lot of planting going on in Butte. This is what a clear cut looks like. In case you haven't seen one, you probably have, but and the logging roads. And a logging truck. This is another one of my dad's camps. Big logs to make the big tent, and a school bus that acted as the kitchen in this camp. This is, well, this one, yeah. I mean, this one, it's northern BC. This is up in Mackenzie, for instance. On the coast, you can tell kind of the difference between the coast planting and the interior camping or planting because of the weather. Essentially, on the coast, it's very dark and it's humid, and it's also early spring, so most of the photos are quite dark. And then as the year goes, or as the season goes by, then they end up higher up with less cloud cover and more bugs.
So what time would the season end? You said they started in like February on the coast?
Yeah, they would start in February, basically as soon as the ground was not frozen. Then they would go into the coast, and then as the snow melted, then they would go up into the interior. It's usually late July or late June, early July, and then it gets too hot for the seedlings. The seedlings come in bundles. There's a photo somewhere in here, but they come in bundles, and they're pretty, they're just little trees. So if it's too hot, then they'll just die. So they try and get them in as early as possible. This is Menlo, and they are juggling.
Do you ever go, like, you were saying you went back to that village, but you ever go back up there and like look at these places that were giant clear cuts and now they're like forested? Or I mean, do you ever like, is that something that's happened now?
I haven't done that. I've gone up tree planting myself, and I assume that I probably have, at that point, came across some, because you can tell where has been clear cut and then regenerated because it's all the same tree. They just plant, and they want to plant whatever is going to be the most profitable, because they are planting to regenerate the forest, but they're also replanting to potentially deforest it as well. So if they're going to plant Sitka spruce, then it's all Sitka spruce, so you can tell what has been replanted just by the fact that everything's the same in that area. But no, I haven't gone up there and looked at all the trees. I haven't yet. This is my dad's crew.
So they had crews of people that would go and do the same encampment or the same contract, or so your dad was in on somebody else's contract at the beginning, and then they formed a crew and they would get their own contracts?
Yeah, when my dad first started, he started when he was 18. He went on his first contract, and he tried tree planting, and it's really, really hard. It's not easy work. It pays well, but it's very, very difficult. And I can attest to that because I did it one time. And I thought I was going to kill it. I thought I was going to be so good at it. And it was the hardest work. I couldn't even imagine. I just figured since I grew up in the camps and was around it all the time that it was going to be really easy or something. And it's not. It's really difficult. It's and so the lifespan of a planter is pretty young. And there are people that do it for 10, 15 years because it also affords a pretty nomadic lifestyle. So if you want to go and live in Mexico for 9 months out of the year and come and plant for 4 months or 3 months or whatever, then you can. Yeah, but when he started contracting, he was 21. And he basically started contracting because he met a forester when he took over a contract for my uncle. He couldn't go up and do it, so he asked my dad if he wanted to do it. My dad did it, and then he got on really well with one of the foresters, and then the forester asked him to come back and bid on some of the contracts. And then he formed his own. A lot of the planters that had come up with him that year followed him back up again, and then because they really liked him, and then he hired a bunch of people that, like his sisters or whoever he could find that wanted to come up and plant. So a lot of these guys, like Dennis and Bear, and this is my Uncle Trevor, they planted with him pretty much the entire time that he was contracting for about 10 years. This is Devaki. This is how you get warm and how you get clean. And they would haul a big cast iron bathtub up with them. This is a real makeshift camp. I don't think they were planning to be in this location very long, so they just built this out of a giant tarp. This is my dad's twin sister, Debbie. She planted with him for 8 years. This is inside the big tent. Yeah, a lot of music. My dad played a lot of music. A lot of the people that he hired, he played music with. And so that was a big part of what went on when they weren't planting. This is out getting ready to start planting.
How long would a workday be? Sunrise to sunset, or?
Yeah, I mean, in the early spring, it gets dark pretty early, so they would get up real early to start, and then you just, yeah, it's basically, yeah, sunrise to sunset. Or when the days get longer and they move north, then they would have some more time off in the evenings. This is a sauna. This is the main way that you get clean out in the bush without any hot water is they would set up camps next to some sort of body of water that would be really cold. And so they would build a makeshift sauna, which is just a plastic around a wooden structure with a airtight stove in the middle, and then they would put rocks on the stove to heat it up, and then they would get naked and get in there and get real hot and then jump in cold water. And that's how you get clean. That's another sauna. It was basically the first thing that would get built. This is a reappropriated pump house from a logging camp that they made into a sauna. This is a float plane. This is my Uncle Leif. And this is Lindy eating yogurt. And this is a float plane up into Butte Inlet. This is my dad's truck that he used primarily for every single contract. There's about 500 photos of that alone. I really love that truck. This is my dad's first camp, and this is really what it looks like. It's just basically in the middle of nowhere, and they would set up tents and plant where this is all where they have to plant. He would get some planters that just wanted to come up for a season because they were trying to raise money for some event or to buy some land. This is one of those guys. This is me and Devaki. Devaki I got recently reintroduced to by doing this project. I actually haven't seen her since I was about 7 years old, and then through doing this book, she got in contact, and it was real special. This is the Teepee River, another spot where they went planting. My dad's teepee. This is Lindy, and this is making yogurt. This is flying into Williston Lake. Williston Lake is up in the interior of BC, close to Mackenzie, and it used to be the Peace River Valley. So the entire thing was a valley, and they logged it because they built a dam and they were going to flood it. And they logged it and as fast as they could because they knew it was going to be flooded, and they wanted to extract as much timber from there as they possibly could. When they flooded it, then there was so many logs that it just jammed up the entire lake, and they had to, it took them years and years to figure out how to clear out the lake, but this entire shoreline you can see is just logs. And they had to actually set up burning stations that they could burn the logs in the middle of the lake. This is Williston Lake. All these next few photos are from Williston Lake. The Williston Lake also rises and falls with the dam, so it can rise up in a matter of just like a couple of hours. It'll start rising, and it'll rise like a few feet within 12 hours, and that's what happened at this camp. They built the tents they built camp too close to the lake, and it started rising. So by the end of the day, when the planters came back, half the camp was underwater. You can see how many logs and how dammed up it is. And this is a sunken camp. There was a logger that was stranded actually on one side, and this is his truck, and so the planters all built a raft to get the truck over onto the other side because he was trapped. And they floated him over. It actually worked. Yeah, lots of rigs, lots of tents. That's the name of it, tree planting. This is me and a dog. I hung out mostly with dogs. There was once in a while there was another kid in camp, but most of the time I was hanging out with the cooks and with the dogs.
So is that snow or sand?
That's sand.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really tough and just hanging out in the snow. It was cool. This is another sauna design if you want to get some ideas for your backyard or,
Like the cardboard.
Yeah. Yeah, cold water, snow melt, obviously. That's my dad. That's me. There's lots of rigs up there that people made themselves, and a lot of times they would just live in them year round, and they would drive them up planting, and then they would drive them down to Peru or wherever they were going to go. This is a really fancy one. Someone took great care. This is a tree checker, and when they would come out, then they would sort of make everyone stand up straight. This is Freddie D. and Bear, and Freddie D. is the guy he's the forester who gave my dad his first contract, and they got on really well, and he worked for the forest industry, and he made these hats for all of my dad's crew, and in Latin it says, "You cut 'em, we cut 'em, you plant 'em," and he gave them to everybody.
So, you were saying that you can, on a good day, I believe you said something about 1,400 trees.
Mm-hmm.
What is the area of 1,400 square, I mean, of 1,400 trees? Is that 1 acre? Is it?
No, it would be, I don't know. What's that?
How close to each other?
They are 5 strides, basic, or no, they're like, I can only do this like this, if I do it like this to tell you. But basically, they're two big steps, so about 5 feet apart. And then they would go in, later on when they started to grow up, they would go in and space them. So, so the ones that were thriving better, then they would take out the ones that weren't.
It's usually about 300 to 400 trees per acre.
Oh,
For dense stocking, which is what they'd be doing. So, 1,500 trees is about 5 acres.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone who knows more about actual numbers of tree planting, I know what I can remember, but very little else. This is my dad's twin sister, Debbie. Sometimes they would just set up camp outside of the back of the truck, and that's what this is. Just if they were only going to be in a certain area for a really small amount of time, then they wouldn't then they wouldn't bother to set up all of the big tents and everything. They would just do a temporary spot. This is my mom and her sister. Another blurry, damaged slide. This is old Vancouver and getting ready to go out. To the hill. This is initial getting ready to set up for camp. This is my dad. In this photo, you can kind of see how, in some parts, how steep it is. It's really, really hard work. Some things are nice and level and easy, and they call that cream. And that's a treat for the day, but a lot of the work is on really steep hillside with quite a bit of debris to shovel through. So you have to get to the ground, which means you have to clear a spot, which a lot of times there's just red rot or there's sticks, and just from logging, a lot of times they clean out the big logs, but they leave all the rest.
Was there a high rate of injury from like kind of scrambling
Yeah, there's definitely some injury, that sprained ankles and whatnot, but there wasn't, to my knowledge, there wasn't anything that was, other than, you know, non-tree planting related injuries, there wasn't that much of that. It was, you know, people would get burned on the airtight stove, or they would, you know, stuff like that more often than actually out doing the actual planting. Yeah?
What did they do for sanitation and to make sure they had disease-free drinking water?
As far as I know, and that's a really good question because I don't actually know the answer to that. I know they didn't haul it in with them. So as far as I know, they were next to bodies of water and they would take the water from there. So a lot of times it was just from creeks and rivers. I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine that that's something I don't actually know the answer to. I don't know. As far as I know, they used, you know, water from they were always set up next to some sort of creek or river that had flowing water, but I don't know if they didn't haul in like drinking water. That is me and my cousin, probably the only other kid that was in camp most of the time with me. This is up in Butte Inlet in a logging truck. I included some sailing photos because my dad took a lot of sailing photos, and that's kind of the other part of the year. That's what we did. My grandfather built a sailboat. He built a sailboat in his backyard and taught his kids how to sail, play music, and ski. So this is me and my mom. And that's Turkey the dog that I was telling you about. Little guy. My Uncle Leif. This is the sailboat my grandfather built. This is a trip around Vancouver Island. My parents circumvented Vancouver Island in 1977. And just about capsized with my Uncle Arndt, who was 18. Lots of life jackets in this picture. My mother water skiing behind the boat. Yeah. Yeah. I guess so. I never knew that until I saw that photo and I was like, you can water ski behind a sailboat? It's amazing, amazing. But yeah. My parents' method of safety was to use rope for pretty much everything. And so rope around the waist tied to the side of the boat was to prevent loss of child. This is the boat almost going under. My dad managed to pop out and take a photo of just how close that was. And some calmer seas.
So, in light of your unique childhood, are you much less risk averse in your childhood? I mean, you know, it's very much not, you know, like it is nowadays, all safe and padded and whatnot.
Yeah.
So,
I kind of straddle the two, I suppose. I have a lot of, you know, romantic nostalgia from my childhood. I did get hurt. I did have some third-degree burns and, you know, some injuries that were, you know, definitely related to not being completely supervised all the time. But I healed, and I feel I feel that there's a little bit less freedom as a parent to let your kids explore as much. Certainly there was no car seats, or there was people breastfeeding while driving on logging roads as I was growing up, and no one thought twice of it, but that doesn't happen anymore. And I mean, yeah, I try to give my kids as much freedom as possible, but it's also like, yeah, I'm also a victim of information, so. So yeah, I try to do both. It gets hot. This is a really odd photo, and there's a few contracts that you get to stay in a motel in, and I found those to be really exciting, like super exciting. I loved those, but they didn't happen very often. But this one, there was a horse tied up outside, painted green, and I guess it was a retired rodeo horse. It's just a very odd photo. This is a horse, and this is a humongous propane tank. So this is a very large horse, and it's just, and he's green and pink.
And when you're 7, you don't think a thing about it. You're just like, hey, that's
Yeah, it's kind of magical, actually. This is another crew photo. This is my dad and my Aunt Val and Peter, and they're all sailing up to, I'm blanking on the island now. A couple of the people that worked for my dad for a long time got married. There was actually 4 couples that all got married who met in my dad's camps. And this is Signe and Howie, and this is their wedding. Signe was one of the cooks. She was the one who did the design on the truck as well. And Menlo, and this is the kitchen. This is what it looks like inside. Propane stove, you can haul up propane tanks.
So the cook was cooking for 14 people?
There was usually 2 cooks, and they were cooking for 25 to 30 people.
3 meals a day, you're guaranteed. The rest, you're on your own.
Yeah. Yep, you got it. Just like nowadays.
Did they come back to camp, or were lunches packed, or?
No, you pack a lunch out.
Okay.
This is actual tree planting. There's almost no photos in this entire collection of actual tree planting, but this is what it looks like. And this is particularly easy.
How did your dad know how to plan the logistics for this? I'm sitting here completely bedazzled with your father, because he's got 25 people there. He's got to be out for what, 5, 6 months even. Planning for emergencies, having enough fuel, food of all different kinds, enough to make sure everyone's got enough vitamins, protein. I mean, this is quite like the organizational challenge. Like, how did he do that? At 21, I couldn't even find my shoes at 21.
I don't actually know, to be honest with you. We had a book launch on Friday, and he came 20 minutes before it ended. He is one of the most disorganized people. I have no idea. I have.
I was wondering how he learned the skills to make all the different tents, and did you pick that up the first year when you went out with more experienced dudes, and it was just kind of.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of the planters that planted for him actually were way older than him. He started contracting when he was 21, and a lot of the planters were in their 30s, and there was somebody that was in their almost 50 who was 48. So they'd all been planting way longer than he had. He was just managing the show. Yeah, I've got a list in here. In one of I went through his journals, and he used to make really detailed lists, actually. He had lists, like, of all the things to get, but there was really no quantity. Like, it was just like propane tanks. Like, how much? Who knows? I don't know. Bread. Like, yeah. I'm not, it is really, I mean, even talking to a lot of the people that I've met as an adult who I knew as a kid who planted for him, they're like, we just forgot how young he was. I can't believe he did all that. And honestly, I really can't either, because he's amazing. But his organizational skills are like very last minute. This is one of the trucks that was provided by the Forest Service, and that's his friend Bill. That's his friend Bill, who is his high school friend, who then went on to be a famous scuba diver in underwater cave explorer in Mexico. Still is. This is an aerial view of a logging camp. That's bags of trees. That's what you'd haul. Those sit on your hips, the 2 bags of trees, and you just draw from that in order to plant all the trees, and you carry out as many as you possibly can so that you don't have to go back and load up. That's my aunt and uncle. They met tree planting. They're still together. This is their truck that they used to drive to Mexico with after planting, and then live in while they were planting. They pretty much still have the same lifestyle, though they have a house.
Did your dad ever grow up and get a real job, quote unquote? I'm just curious, like, what does he do now?
He still works outside mostly. He's a carpenter. He builds houses, and he's actually getting his hip replaced tomorrow. I think he was like, I think maybe all the walking around. But yeah, he worked, after he did that, he couldn't really figure out what to do, but he didn't want to go. He had kids, and he wanted to not be out for so many months at a time. And to answer your question, they would go back in between contracts to replenish supplies. They didn't have to pack for 4 or 5 months at a time. They would have to pack for usually about 3 weeks to a month at a time.
Yeah, it's still impressive.
Yeah, I know. I have a hard time going to the park and forgetting snacks. It's hard. This is a clear cut. This is a bear. There was a lot of bears, actually, that would come into camp. Most of the time, they were just little black bears, and they would get easily scared away with pots and pans and dogs. Sometimes they would be a little more curious, but there's one story that Devaki was telling me, that there was a bear that came into camp, and they were going after the honey. It's really stereotypical of a bear, but going after the honey, and then they scared the bear away, or they scared it, and she took the kids down to the river, took us down to the river, and then came back, and the entire thing of peanut butter was gone. They had just taken the entire tub of it. This is how kids get clean. That's me and Poppy. It's Lindy's son. Lindy passed away recently, actually, sadly. Fair amount of that. my dad's mom. She came up and cooked one year. The dog actually looks a lot skinnier in that photo, and it doesn't look very healthy or happy, and I'm always kind of sad for this photo because that dog is actually probably one of the happiest dogs that's ever lived. But definitely it looks not stoked in this photo. This is my aunt and uncle's truck house, the International. This is Slim. He is the oldest planter that worked for my dad, and he was 48. And he was a really good planter. That's my dad. It's an interesting double exposure with the planting and the sailing. This is his crew. And that's it. If you have any other questions, feel free. Yeah? Well, when I first found the slides, I didn't know, I was looking at them as an adult, and I didn't know a lot of the people that were in them. I mean, I recognized faces from ages and ages ago. But to me, they just aesthetically were really interesting to look at. It was something that I didn't know that my dad even did. So it was an interesting discovery. And then, yeah, originally I was like, well, at least I can just make a photo book. I don't know where any of these people are. My dad's lost contact with a lot of those people. And then I did Kickstarter to do the book. And then through the process of doing the Kickstarter, I got in contact with several people that were actually in the photos, because it just generated, a natural network that people started sharing it, and then within not very long, then I got in touch with other people, and then my dad was basically he doesn't use a computer almost at all. He actually has the one time that he threw his phone through his computer, so then he had nothing to really look at anything with. And so I was doing this project basically without him even seeing any of it. And from the slides, that the original idea behind why he took all these photos, which I don't think I shared with you, is that he wanted to document the time that they were all out on the hill, and then have a big party at the end of the season and have a slideshow. So, and he was from, Lynn Valley, Vancouver. This was all stuff that he'd never seen before. He definitely fell in love with just being outside and the whole lifestyle of tree planting, and the camaraderie and the relationships that he developed with people. And so when he hadn't actually seen any of these slides at all until I was fundraising for the book, because I tried to send him a file, I tried to send him scans, I tried to send him all sorts of stuff. I was like, could you maybe think about writing something for it? And he was like, I don't even know. Is anyone really want to see these things? I don't even know. I don't even know what's in there. And then and then after the book was funded, actually, then I went up, and that's when he showed me all these other slides of the earlier ones of Kingcome Inlet and that camp, and then gave me all his journals as well. And that's when I decided I would include some of the journal writing and some of the other stories that he had, and then he got to work writing his stories for the book, and I was happy that he actually was able to do that, because it fleshed out the story a little bit more than just having the photos. What's that? And yeah, exactly. I mean, he could deal with like text messages. So while I was sort of going through, because I started it just on an Instagram account about 2 years ago, and just was posting photos just because they're interesting to me. And so I would send him a photo and say, "Oh, who's this? Who's this person?" Then he would write back, and he knows everybody. Like, he remembers everybody's name. He remembers what their truck's name was. He remembered how much, what kind of mechanical problems they had. He does have a really photographic memory, actually, from this period of time. Yeah, so that's how it came about. Yeah.
What are your plans for this story, or what's next after the book?
I don't know.
More talks like this?
I don't know, honestly. I just am taking it as it comes, I suppose. Getting the book done was a pretty big endeavor, and now it's finding homes, other places, and getting shipped out, and that's amazing and awesome. And I don't know. I'm just taking it as it comes. There's a potential at some point. Because there's, this is the largest amount of photos of this time that I've found or that I know about. But through doing this project and getting a lot more of the old tree planters back in touch, and I've had lots of conversations with other people like Doug Cowell, who had those photographs. Those all came after I'd after I put the project together. So there's actually potentially a larger project to be had that would include many more stories and many more photographs from different people's camps and other, because people have stories to tell. They like to talk about them. They love them. The old tree planters are crazy about them. Yeah, this one guy came and he came up and he was like, "My name's John. I was blah, blah, blah. I was there, blah, blah, blah." He has a fountain of stories that he couldn't tell me in the 15 minutes that I had to talk to him. But yeah, there's a lot more stories out there for sure, and a lot more photos. So potentially we'll do another larger archive. I don't know. Yeah.
You say, well, I'm curious, how long were you actually in the camp as a youngster?
I was in the camp mostly from the time that I was born until I started school, obviously, when I was 5. So I was there from when I was born until 5, and then I would go up after, in the later spring, on the contracts that my parents would go in the later spring. Yeah, till I was about 10. Yeah, and then I didn't want to go anymore. Yeah.
So when you did tree planting yourself as an adult, did you go for a season or just for
I went for 2 contracts. I was 17, and I went for 2 contracts. And the first day, I planted 75 trees, which is about $7.50. And by the end, I was able to plant about 2,000 trees, but because you get strong real fast. Like, it is it's a lot of physical work, so you do actually get in shape really quickly. But yeah, it's hard. It's really hard, for sure. I don't remember what your question was. I'm sorry.
Were you doing a project or planning to travel or?
At the time, I really just I wanted to try it out. I knew it was a way to make money. I could definitely get a job because I knew all the contractors. and I wanted to try it out. It's tough, plus there's a lot of bugs. But I did appreciate it. I liked it a lot as far as for the 2 contracts that I went out on. But it wasn't, I mean, and then I signed a lot of my friends up. I was like, oh yeah, I can get you a job, no problem, I'll get you a job. And I had a friend actually who went out for years and years, but he just did the laundry. Like he just would go out and say, and his nickname was 150 because he could only plant 150 trees a day. And he's a terrible planter. He was going broke. But he really loved to be out there and he loved to be with all the people. And so he just started doing everyone's laundry and say, okay, I'll do your laundry. You plant me 200 trees. You plant me 200 trees. So they would all do that. And then he would end up making a decent wage. But he just did everyone's laundry. But yeah, it's no joke. It's hard work for sure. Yeah.
The artwork that they have on the vehicles and kind of just see in some of the ways that folks dress and carry themselves, like what was the philosophical or spiritual outlook they had while they were doing this work? I mean, it's reforestation, which has a really, planting trees they grew up doing, and it's, feels really good.
Yeah.
On the other hand, being in a clear cut, it's like you're in the middle of devastation.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what was their outlook on it? Were they just doing a job, or were they healing the earth, or what?
I think it was a combination. I think a lot of them I can't speak for everybody, but I think there was a draw to being able to do something unconventional. There's definitely this was all taking place during a pretty strong hippie movement, so a lot of people were going back to the land and wanting to, do something outside, and this was a way to make money doing that. I think the act of planting trees doesn't feel bad. You're not inflicting any harm, and certainly learning how to be resourceful and rely on your community and be with people that you have connections with was all a draw for them. Philosophically, my parents were hippies and everything that entails, and everyone that they worked with pretty much was. And but yeah, it was definitely like that was I think more ingrained in maybe what it is now. But yeah, it was a way to have a lot of freedom with your life at the time. Yeah.
Brothers and sisters?
I do. My parents broke up when I was 2 and a half, I believe. That trip around Vancouver Island was their deciding whether they were going to stay together. They were together very young. They were very young. They did plant together for a long time after that, but they weren't together as a couple. But that they decided to circumvent an island on a sailboat to see if they wanted to stay together. So it didn't work out. But but yeah, I have two brothers with my mom, and a brother and 2 sisters with my dad.
And did they ultimately end up going planting?
No. They were
In the camps at all as youngsters?
my brothers, my mom's sons. I think maybe they made it up to a couple camps, but they're quite a bit younger than. I was the only one they decided to have when they were real young. Then they decided to maybe wait a little bit. Yeah. So actually, when my brother was born, when my dad had my brother, that was kind of a deciding factor of whether he wanted to keep contracting, because his new wife was not a tree planter and didn't really appreciate him being away for so long, and he didn't want to be away from his younger son that long, so he transitioned out of it around then. But yeah. Any other questions? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. I thought about that halfway through, and I've never publicly spoken before, so making sure.
Great job.
Oh, thanks.
All right. We return on
Oh,
February
thanks.
4th with Joshua Berger from
Good job. Thanks. I
14
feel like it was a little long.
year that they collaborated on.
You should have seen Daddy.
What's that?
You should have seen Daddy.
Why?
What's he doing? His this really cute suit on him.
When Josh set out on his bike for his normal ride toward the steel